2003, the Ottawa Jewish Historical Society presents Mr. A.J. Freiman speaking about the Tissot affair and anti-Semitism in the 1930s.
Of where I'm going to take this talk tonight, and the first thing is why the Tissot case. Then I want to get into a brief background of A.J. Freiman and Lillian Freiman so that we can bring us to 1935, and then I want to focus on the facts of the Tissot case, and then I want to move into some of the stuff my father wrote, and my father put a lot of feelings into the Tissot case, so it's the facts and the feelings. That'll be sort of that part of it. I backtrack a little bit, but it's interesting. I hope it's interesting. And then a recent news article I've read, and then I'm hoping we'll end up, I know Hy Soloway's here, and I'm hoping he'll come up, and Joe Leaf, and maybe they can remember, and maybe there's others here who could remember. Why the Tissot case? Why am I here, and what's the reason for talking about the Tissot case? I personally have always found the Tissot case to be an interesting situation. I found that through the years, literally no one ever talked about it unless you asked them about it. So it was an event that probably most people, certainly out of Ottawa, wouldn't remember, and younger people for sure wouldn't even know about it, more or less. So that's my reason for the Tissot case, and my talk tonight will be focused on the Tissot case itself. The Freiman family, starting with A.J. Freiman. He was born in 1880 in Werbelin, Lithuania, and he came to Canada in 1893 to Hamilton and established the business in Ottawa at 73 Rideau Street in 1902. So he was like 22 years old. He'd been in business from the time he was 19, but by the time he was 22, he was in business. He expanded what became Freiman's in 1908 to the address of 67 Rideau and 83 Rideau. And I don't know for sure whether that was what the store ended up as. I know at the very end, my father bought, even in the 60s, I believe, a piece of the building that he didn't own in the middle of the store. So I'm not sure whether the entire store at that time, by 1908, was Freiman's as some of us remembered it. By 1923, the name of the firm had become A.J. Freiman Limited. And what's sort of interesting to me, just backtracking a little, by 1913, so he was 33 years old, he'd moved into 149 Somerset Street, which is now the Army Mess. And by 1917, he'd bought Meech Lake, which you all know as the Meech Lake Accord. And when I was working on this, my grandparents had named it Mitzpah, which means lookout in Hebrew, and I guess Mr. Moroni didn't do his homework because it could have been lookout rather than lookout. So the point I'm trying to make here is, into the teens they were well established financially. The business was well established. Zionism. At age 21, on December 18, 1901, in Montreal, A.J. Freiman attended the second convention of the Federation of Zionist Societies. At this convention, he was elected a member of the Zionist National Council, and at the 12th Zionist Convention held in Ottawa, June 20, 1912, he was elected one of the vice presidents. At age 38, January 1919, A.J. Freiman was elected the head of the Zionist movement in Canada, which he held until he died, which was 1944. So from 1919 to 1944. He was president of the Zionist organization. Then a couple of significant stories. The Redeeming the Emek Heifer is a story of buying this huge tract of land in Israel, which runs north of Herzliya and south of Netanya, and it's 11,000 acres of land. And I'll go back to my notes. Menachem Yuzishkin had sought the support of A.J. Freiman and the Canadian Zionist organization to buy a large tract of land called the Emek Heifer. At the 21st Zionist Convention in Winnipeg in July 1927, A.J. Freiman proposed the purchase of it, which was 46,000 dunams or 11,000 acres. The cost was $1 million, payable at $100,000 a year for 10 years, but they needed $300,000 down payment then. The debate on the purchase was dramatic. The purchase was voted on and passed unanimously. A.J. Freiman then had to get the $300,000. He was first up and guaranteed $50,000, which was by far the largest commitment made. Others followed, and at that convention they got the $300,000. A.J. Freiman then said, and I quote, "Gentlemen, we have reached $300,000. He then turned to Menachem Mendel Yuzishkin, who was president of the Jewish National Fund, and said, Mr. Yuzishkin, you can sign the deed for Emek Heifer in the name of the Jews of Canada." And ultimately, there are two kibbutzim on the Emek Heifer. One is called Beit Acharon, after my grandfather, and the other one's Havetzelet Hasharon, which is Havetzelet's Lily of the Valley, or Lillian, I guess. So that was Archibald Freiman. Lillian Freiman. She was born in 1885 in Mattawa and married A.J. Freiman in 1903. She was 18. In the spring of 1919, the Hadassah organization was successfully launched. The aim of Hadassah had twofold objectives: aid to Palestine and relief for European Jewry. She became the head of Hadassah and was the president until 1932, when for health reasons she had to resign. And by that time, Hadassah had grown to 134 chapters across Canada under her leadership. And for me personally, the next story is the best story, and that's the story of the Ukrainian orphans, which is, I think actually a movie could be made of this. In the summer of 1920, news reached Canada that there were 137,000 Jewish orphans in the Ukraine. And I've condensed this down to really a very small thing, but it's a major story. Under the leadership of Lillian Freiman, it was decided to try to get the Canadian government to let 1,000 children come to Canada. After negotiations, the government, represented by Mr. Blair, agreed to let 200 perfect children come into Canada. She visited the homes of adopted parents across Canada, then went to the Ukraine, helped pick the children, bought them clothes, and brought them to Canada, where they were sent to their homes. And I don't really get back to Mr. Blair, but I believe that Mr. Blair was the Mr. Blair who ultimately represented the government into the 20s and 30s, and he really was the guy who, representing the government, who kept the Jews really from entering Canada. And in my father's book, I think the number between 33 and 1938 was 4,500 Jews. That's all that got into Canada in those 5 tough years. And another little anecdote, I was talking to, I met Sam Berger, I believe it was in the 80s, and I asked him about the Tissot case. He remembered it very well. And I asked him about Mr. Blair, and I quote him because he was so angry, even 50 years later. he said to me, "The dirty rat, he lied into my face." So that's the Mr. Blair I think we're talking about. Order of the British Empire. On January 1st, 1934, His Majesty King George V conferred on Lillian Freiman the rank and decoration of Officer of the Order of the British Empire, Civil Division, for community work, service to returned soldiers, and leadership in Jewish charitable organizations. Lillian Freiman was the first Jewish person to receive the Order of the British Empire. And just a brief summary of some of the things. She started Poppy Day, Mother of Canadian Hadassah, Honorary President of King Edward Synagogue, Honorary Vice President of the Pearly Home, Honorary Life Member of the Amputations Association of the Great War Veterans of Canada, Vice President, Ottawa Branch, Canadian National Institute of the Blind, President, Ottawa Girl Guides. And just to summarize how we get into 35. So we've got a family well established financially, both Archie and Lillian Freiman, leaders in for sure the Jewish community, and I believe Lillian Freiman, seems to me, more of a leader in the non-Jewish community. And, you know, in my notes I've written that Israel was still a dream, and there was no state of Israel. So it must have been a greater struggle then. Okay, now I move into the facts of the Tissot case. Of the anti-Semitism existing in the 30s, it was most pronounced in certain newspapers and newsletters, of which the Montreal-based Le Patriote newspaper was most notorious. Readership numbers are difficult to obtain, but it was known that the paper did have readers in Ottawa and later expanded into Ottawa. Included in the readers are Detective Jean Tissot. Fascist leader Adrien Arcand was a contributor to the newspaper. There still exist numerous copies of these newspapers at different libraries across the country, especially in collections dealing with Adrien Arcand. The anti-Semitic vitriol and hatred was similar to that expected to be found in the Nazi newspapers of Germany during the mid-30s. The Ottawa edition of Le Patriote, around the time of the affair with Jean Tissot, published pieces where slander and racism permeated. One line read, quote, "When one becomes acquainted with the Jew, he inspires revulsion and disgust, not hatred. He is to be fled from like the plague itself," unquote. Another edition of Le Patriote entered Ottawa Jew Ramones, claimed Jews were the rulers over Russia, Spain, and Mexico, and were murdering Christians in those countries. Moreover, Le Patriote claimed that a Jew, quote, "is extremely touchy. If you but look at him sideways and seem to be taking the measure of his curved nose, he immediately begins grimacing and his eyes flash with a burning hate." Again, these libels were very similar to late 19th and early 20th century Russian propaganda, as well as mid-1930s Nazi propaganda. It was in this context that the affair of Jean Tissot could be explained. The spring and summer of 1935 was when Jean Tissot was working his hardest to destroy, at least financially, A.J. Freiman, the prominent Ottawa Jew who was a thorn in the side of Tissot. Tissot was an avid reader of Le Patriote, and that newspaper devoted a lot of its attention to A.J. Freiman and his perceived powers. Le Patriote accused A.J. Freiman of hiring Jews at his department store to the detriment of non-Jewish employees. The newspaper also accused Jews of controlling all of the important businesses on Rideau Street in downtown Ottawa, which used to be almost exclusively owned by French Catholic merchants. Le Patriote had a solution to the problem. By boycotting, quote, the ultra-Zionist A.J. Freiman and every other Jew, by boycotting the ultra-Zionist A.J. Freiman and every other Jew. An edition of Le Patriote from May 1935 again urged the boycott of Jewish-owned businesses in Ottawa in order to end the perceived Jewish domination of the Ottowa business. Other other editions made spurious claims that Freiman had fired non-Jewish employees in order to hire Jewish employees. Freiman attempted a rebuttal aimed directly at Ottawa's French-Canadian community. Freiman's secretary-treasurer, S.R. Ouellette, granted an interview to Ottawa French daily newspaper Le Droit. He said that the claim by Le Patriote that A.J. Freiman had fired non-Jews in order to hire Jews was positively ridiculous and was nothing more than Nazi hokum. Rather, Ouellette believed these claims originated in Montreal and with the likes of Adrien Arcand. The messages of Le Patriote were, however, taken to heart by Jean Tissot, who would later attempt to put these theories into practice. Tissot's first attempt to damage Freiman's financial viability came in early 1935. Tissot attempted to heed the call of Le Patriote and other fascist newspapers to target Jewish merchants in their communities by boycott. Jean Tissot brought his copy of a Chicago fascist newspaper, which ranted about Jewish merchants, to the publishing company of William Grant and Herbert Monroe of Bryce and Graham Department Store. Tissot told Monroe that he needed help, quote, to carry on the good work of driving the Jews out of Ottawa, unquote. Tissot told Monroe that the time had come for Christian merchants to band together to drive the Jewish merchants out of Ottawa. Tissot requested financial support to enable this to take place, of which Monroe declined. Monroe also declined Tissot's request to organize a band of Christian merchants in Ottawa to help eliminate Monroe's competition. Monroe was steadfast that he wanted no part of that. When Freiman himself heard that Tissot was circulating the Chicago paper, calling for the boycott of Jewish merchants, he badly wanted to get a hold of a copy. Freiman's good friend, Ottawa upholsterer David Williams, approached Monroe, who passed along the copy Tissot had personally given him. Monroe felt Freiman should know what was going on, which later nearly got him in trouble, as he was charged by Tissot for passing along libelous material to someone else. This event was enough proof to Freiman that anti-Semitism was something isolated and was not a sentiment shared by most non-Jews in Ottawa. Herbert Monroe's example of rejecting Tissot's boycott attempts and his willingness to inform Freiman of the situation as well as the total lack of success Tissot had in his attempts constituted proof positive of a friendly environment in Ottawa for Jews. By May 1935, Tissot had himself convinced again that he could indeed cause the downfall of A.J. Freiman if he could only organize the non-Jewish community to help destroy his business. On May 13th, Detective Jean Tissot brought a copy of the Patriote to Graham and Monroe's publishing house. Tissot gave the copy of Le Patriote and also the article Ottawa Jewelry Mons to William Graham, who passed it along to Herbert Monroe. Later in court, Graham stated that he understood the Patriot, and although he felt it to be disgusting, he nonetheless passed it on to Mr. Monroe. Monroe then told Tissot personally that the papers were a disgrace. Again, though, Tissot's attempts failed, but the substance of the materials Tissot attempted to have published placed Tissot in a predicament he could not escape. A.J. Freiman was aware of the contents of the material Tissot gave to Graham and Monroe to be published and believed they constituted libel against him. One of the items Tissot gave Graham and Monroe was an insulting caricature designed to be A.J. Freiman. The other was a translation of the article, Ottawa Jews Moan from Le Patriot. That article accused Freiman of purposely trying to destroy Jewish businesses in Ottawa. It also accused Freiman of running Canada through occult influence rather than morals and love. As a result, Freiman filed charges against Jean Tissot in court, accusing him of libel. It would be in court where Freiman could get retribution upon Tissot and other anti-Semites who were targeted discrediting him by showing them how the law was squarely on his side. This was not the first time Tissot was in trouble for advocating anti-Semitic views. In April 1935, Tissot was threatened with termination from the Ottawa police force if he continued any of his anti-Jewish actions. Tissot's unwillingness to take the warning seriously did result in his later suspension from the police force. When the case got to court, Freiman hired Colonel Warwick Beamont, A.W. Beamont, as his lawyer, and Tissot hired J.V. Vincent as his lawyer. Vincent appeared, at least outwardly, not to share feelings much different than his client. He claimed the articles Mr. Tissot attempted to have published were not an attack on Mr. Freiman personally, but, quote, upon the Jews and their methods. Vincent accused Freiman of spearheading a campaign to gain control of, quote, all the human activities of the country, as in all other countries. To Vincent, Tissot was nothing more than an honorable citizen and a distinguished member of the police force. Freiman's lawyer, A.W. Beamont, responded frequently to Vincent's claims in courts and countered that Tissot was really an honorable citizen. He should have known better than to do what he had done. The presiding judge, Glenn Strike, told Vincent he better watch his accusations because they were baseless. Clearly, the trial was destined to become a trial about Jewish methods in business rather than Tissot's actions, rather than whether Tissot's actions were illegal. It was the types of accusations thrown about by Vincent that were reminiscent of anti-Semitic libels from the Middle Ages. Now they appeared in the courtroom in Canada's capital, but Freiman was relieved that the judge did not accept the spurious accusations, again reinforcing the idea that there was not widespread institutional anti-Semitism in Canada. Again, through the trial, J.V. Vincent attempted to change the subject from whether or not the charges against Tissot were true to whether the Jews were indeed the transgressors he claimed them to be. At a rally in Hull to support Tissot on July 7, 1935, Vincent again launched accusations that Jews had destroyed French-Canadian merchants on Rideau Street. Tissot's son also spoke to a small crowd and compared Jews to communists and urged the boycott of Jewish business. When H.G. Munro was put on the stand, Vincent attempted to have him admit that the business methods of Jews, all Jews, were scurrilous. Again, for the third time, Munro chose to defend Freiman rather than pursue the convenient way out and told Vincent that Jews were honest businessmen. The numerous accusations hurled by Vincent at Jews were in most cases rebuffed and not taken seriously by the judge. In the end, Tissot was convicted on 2 counts of publishing a defamatory libel and fined $50. The judge stated that he believed Tissot's punishment by the police force of suspension was a little severe, and he had to decide whether the suspension was to be made permanent. The judge accused Tissot of being a foolish man who should have known better. The judge limited the fine to $50 because of Tissot's, quote, previous good behavior. Tissot was defiant after he left the courtroom, still maintaining his claim that he had done nothing wrong. He just did not think that the jury would understand why he did what he did. Tissot was actually greeted by 50 supporters on leaving the court, and Freiman's lawyer Beamont worried that these men would continue their attempts to hurt A.J. Freiman's business. As it turned out, nothing came of it, and the attempt to destroy Freiman's successful business had failed. Despite the actions of a few, with a good deal of help and support from the non-Jewish community, Freiman would continue to thrive for years to come. So that's the more or less the factual Tissot part. What I want to move into is my father's recollection, the recollection of the Freiman family, more or less from his perspective and the feelings that they felt during this journey. I asked my mother last night if she remembered anything about it. And all she said to me was, "I don't really remember much, but it was an awful time." So this is about the same length, but it just gives a bit of the perspective of from Lawrence Freiman's point of view. In the frightening years of the 30s, when Nazism was gaining support, the world did not recognize that Hitler's venomous anti-Semitism had in fact become an international scourge of the Jewish people. Hitler had sympathizers throughout the Western world. Among them were Sir Oswald Mosley in England and Pierre Laval in France. It was inevitable that this ugliness would find its way to Canada. In Montreal, anti-Semitic rallies were held in which the participants wore uniforms replete with swastika and gave the fascist salute. Publications such as Le Gobelou and Le Patriote told the anti-Semitic lie. Mark this in yellow. We were shocked and frightened at the support which made them possible. By the mid-30s, this had expanded to Ottawa. In the Ottawa edition of Le Patriote, my father and his business became a target of attack. This excerpt from the Ottawa edition of May 16, 1935 is typical. And this is a translation from the French. Quote, "Our forefathers did not found and colonize this country to provide the means for Freiman and a horde of Jews to enrich themselves. The British flag flies over anti-Jews as much as over Jews. Since this flag grants liberty, we take advantage of this liberty to defend ourselves against the invasion of Jews," unquote. The attack was an emotional appeal to racial, religious, and economic concerns of French Canadians in the years when the Depression was still being strongly felt. As in a great deal of effective propaganda, the situation was oversimplified to we and they. In an article entitled quote, "Christian Charity and Christians," in the Ottawa edition of Le Patriote, June 13, 1935, the Jews were seen as aliens, even denied to be Canadians. Christian charity, quote, "Christian charity in which we believe and which the Jew will soon learn to his detriment requires that if there is success, prosperity, trade and commerce, and thriving industries to be had by someone in Canada, that it be best for a Canadian. If there is to be supremacy, whether it be financial, industrial, commercial, professional, or social in Canada, then it must be the supremacy of Canadians. If a certain mentality, tradition, civilization, or aspirations can exist in our country, they must first be those of Canadians. Now all Canadians are Christians, and the first duty of Christian charity is to protect and guarantee oneself against all which may be anti-Christian, that is to say, prejudicial to themselves. And Jews, because they are militant anti-Christians, signify a real danger for Canadians in all spheres, both material and spiritual." According to the Patriot, May 23, 1935, one of the obvious solutions to the Jewish problem in Canada was as follows, and I quote, "It would be enough if Christians stopped buying from Jews and making them rich, and would buy instead from Christians. In this way, they will give Christians the financial strength necessary to support Christian charities, which are solely in need of help, and at the same time will put an end to the peril of Jewish domination. Let us buy everything from Christians, never from Jews." The paper exhorted its readers to boycott Jewish businesses and listed stores which they believed to be run or owned by Jews. The September 19th edition carried this retraction. Quote, "Unfortunately, a correspondent of Le Patriote in Ottawa made an error in designating the Star Shoe Repairing at 3314 Dalhousie as belonging to Jews. They are not Jews, neither in race, heart, or spirit. The names of the owners misled him. He had not gone to see whether the owners had hooked noses. They did not." We awoke one morning to find a huge black swastika painted on our front door and felt sadness at the loss of the quiet life my father valued so highly in Ottawa. My father believed that Canadians would not tolerate such viciousness and decided that he would fight this evil in the courtroom. So began a long and difficult legal struggle. Anti-Semitic activities were undertaken in Ottawa by Jean Tissot, a detective from the Ottawa Police Force. On May 29, 1935, Father launched 2 informations charging against Tissot for defamatory libel. In the first information, my father charged that on May 13, 1935, Jean Tissot, quote, did unlawfully publish a defamatory libel concerning the said A.J. Freiman to William McCullough Graham of the City of Ottawa and Herbert Grenville Monroe of the same place, in the form of a typewritten translation and a certain article in the newspaper known as Le Patriote, which said translation was headed Ottawa Jewelry Moans and contains the following defamatory statements concerning the said A.J. Freiman, and this is a quote out of the Ottawa Citizen, May 29, 1935. This information included excerpts of the article and their interpretation by the informant, my father, as follows: meaning thereby that the said A.J. Freiman was associated with and is in sympathy with the torture and slaughter of Christians, meaning thereby that the said A.J. Freiman is a dishonest and unethical businessman and is unworthy of the trust and confidence of the public and is a loathsome and repulsive character, meaning thereby that the said A.J. Freiman is addicted to dishonest and criminal business methods, meaning thereby that the said A.J. Freiman is a treacherous and despicable character. In the second information, my father charged that Tissot, quote, did unlawfully publish to William McCullough Graham of the City of Ottawa and Herbert Grenville Monroe of the same place a copy of a newspaper called The Patriot, Ottawa edition dated May 16, 1935, which contains therein and on the front page thereof a defamatory picture or cartoon with a caption and a description annexed thereto, which was defamatory of the said A.J. Freiman, unquote. In this case, the informant charged, quote, that the said cartoon in connection with the caption and description means or was intended to mean that the said A.J. Freiman was a dishonest businessman, a despicable character, and was unworthy of the confidence and trust of the community. During the preliminary hearing, as reported in the Ottawa Citizen, Friday, June 21st, 35, Mr. Monroe, General Manager of Bryson Graham's department store in Ottawa, was asked to testify. Mr. Monroe said 6 months previously, Mr. Tissot brought him a paper published in Chicago and attacking Jewish merchants. Quote, he told me the time had come for Christian merchants in Ottawa to organize to drive the Jews out of Ottawa. He told me that he had used a great deal of his own finances in the work and needed financial support. He suggested that I organize a League of Christian Merchants to assist in the good work, and also suggested it would be a good way to get rid of competition. I told him I would have nothing to do with it, unquote. Defense counsel J.V. Vincent rested his argument on the legal point that libel did not apply to racial groups. And I think that's an important issue, and the lawyers probably could clarify that later on. He maintained that the publication of the article was an attack upon the Jews, that A.J. Freiman's name appeared not as an individual, but as a man belonging to a race. Here is what Ottawa people read in the Ottawa Evening Citizen, June 26, 1935. When the case was called, Mr. Vincent advanced the argument that the article published did not contain a libel and that therefore there was not sufficient evidence on which to commit Tissot for trial. Addressing the court, Mr. Vincent declared that the publication of the article in Le Patriote was, first of all, an attack upon the Jews. The name of Freiman appeared in it not as an individual, but as a man belonging to a race against which there was a campaign owing to their business methods and their attempt to gain control of all human activities, in this and in all other communities. Continuing, Mr. Vincent said the articles complained of were against the Jews, and Mr. Freiman was mentioned as president of the secret society of Jews, who we know are working not only in this country, but in all other countries. Mr. Freiman is a public man, and as a public man is liable to be criticized in his actions, said Mr. Vincent. There is reason for connecting him with the campaign against the Jews, of which he is the head of this country. We wish to point out, which he's the head in this country. We wish to point out there is no libel in linking Freiman with the statements concerning the Jews. On June 28th, Magistrate Glenn E. Strike ruled that there was sufficient evidence against Tissot to commit him to trial by jury at the fall assizes of the Supreme Court of Ontario. As the trial began, we all knew that by implication, my father and Jews in general were as much on trial as Jean Tissot. That quickly became evident in the line of questioning directed at my father as reported in the Citizen October 9th. And I quote, "You are connected with the Zionist Organization of Canada," Mr. Vincent asked. I am. I am president of the organization and very conversant with the Jewish movement in the whole Dominion. What is the purpose of the Zionist organization? We establish a home in Palestine for Jews. How large is Palestine? It is approximately 150 miles by 60 miles. Do you expect to establish all Jews there? No, not at all. There are other races in Palestine. Are there not? Certainly. The Arabs form 70% of the population. Asked about the number of Jews in this country, Father stated that there were 150,000 Jewish people in Canada. In Toronto, there were 30,000, Montreal, 50,000, Ottawa, 3,000, he testified, while some 4 million Jews resided in the United States. Mr. Vincent asked, are all these funds you collect used in repatriation only? Nothing else? A.J. Freiman responded. How many Jews could you place in Palestine? Quote again, the Zionist movement figures on placing 5 million Jews there, which I think is what the population is literally now, which is, when I was doing this, I was amazed. Father stated that Arabs were benefiting greatly through the Jewish people in Palestine, so much so that they were coming in from other countries. It is the only country in the world that is prosperous in these times of depression, he said. Is it not true that the Jewish ideal and the Christian ideal are absolutely opposite, the defense lawyer asked. That is not true. How about the Talmud? I know very little about it, and few people in Ottawa know anything about it. I did when I was a child, but it is a very deep and complicated study. You are a great advertiser of your business, are you not? I advertise like any other businessman. When you donate to hospitals and other charities, you keep your eye on the public, do you not? No, I give to charities only as a citizen who desires to help them. Do you do business with the General Hospital? I believe we have done some. Do you do any business with the Hull Hospital or the Salvation Army? I cannot say. With the Civic Hospital, I think we have done some business with that hospital. These insinuations were deeply repugnant to Father because they affronted his love of people. In his address to the jury, the defense lawyer said, quote, Mr. Freiman, instead of proceeding against the root of the evil, proceeded against one individual man who only gave a translation of the article to Mr. Graham and Mr. Monroe of Bryce and Graham. You men, some of you are businessmen, know the sort of competition being carried on by merchants along Rideau Street, Spark Street, and Bank Street. There is a hidden motive behind the prosecution of Mr. Tissot, and while we have not been able to get to the bottom of it, we know it exists. Why did Mr. Freiman not sue the paper instead that was circulating the libel all over the city and province? You all know what is happening in business today. Was there anything very mean in Mr. Tissot asking Christians to organize to protect themselves against the Jews and to save your trade? As to the caricature contained in the paper, we see similar ones every day depicting the Prime Minister and Mr. King. Yet these men do not take action against anyone. The paper only repeats the speech of A.L. Sacker, and I say there is no libel in publishing a piece that lauds Mr. Freiman. Mr. Justice Kelly addressed the jury defining the law in cases of criminal libel. Libel, quote, libel of the kind charged in this case is called defamatory libel, which means libel that has been published without legal justification or excuse and designed to injure or hurt the person against whom it was published. In cases of this kind, the accused must justify his act on the grounds that the publication was for the public good. I brought that to the attention of counsel for the accused before this trial was proceeded with, asking whether the accused would enter a special plea. His counsel said no, that a not guilty plea would be entered as there was no libel here. Quote, you must decide whether the public peace has been endangered. You must decide whether the public peace has been endangered. If you find that it has, you must find the accused guilty, his lordship concluded. On October 9th, after deliberating for 2 hours, the jury found Tissot guilty as charged. At the time of the trial, Tissot was seeking election in the federal riding of Ottawa East, emphasizing his anti-Jewish and anti-communist attitudes. An edition of the Patriot, dated October 17th, urged voters to support him. By voting for Jean Tissot, you will show to the Jew your will to see him stand aside before the Christian, and you will make clear to communism your belief in the incontestable superiority of Christian values to provide peace for our people. By voting for Jean Tissot, in addition to forcing back the Jewish invader, you will have given a Christian the power necessary to fight effectively for Christians. You will have given him the chance to devote all his efforts to freeing those of our own people who already feel the claws of Jewry digging into their throats. And then this last paragraph, which I think is what it's all about. When the election results were in, E.R.E. Chevrier, I believe, had been reelected. The legal system had supported my father, and the electorate had rejected Tissot. But, and I marked this in yellow, but we were left with a sickening feeling of loss that such deep prejudice could be found here. Incredibly, quote, it did happen here, in the city and country we love so dearly. It is not a cliche to say that freedom must be continually earned and, if necessary, fought for. And finally, just to end this little talk, I happened to be reading my newspaper this weekend, the Ottawa Citizen, in September 13th, 2003, and this little story appeared. Germany, neo-Nazis arrested for plotting attack. A neo-Nazi gang arrested in Germany with a haul of explosives and weapons is suspected of plotting a bloodbath at the site of Munich's new Jewish synagogue on the anniversary of Hitler's Kristallnacht. On the night, quote, the night of the broken glass on November 9, 1938, Jewish homes, businesses, and places of worship across Germany were ransacked. Dozens of Jews were murdered, and thousands were sent to concentration camp in the first Nazi pogrom after the assassination by a Jew of a German diplomat in Paris. It's almost like I'm reading from 1935, but I mean, this is Saturday's paper. Police say the right-wing extremists were planning the outrage for the 65th anniversary of Kristallnacht, when President Johann Rau is to lay the foundation stones for a synagogue, school, and community center due to open in 2005. Thank you very much.
any questions?
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that some. I know Hi's here, and Joe Leaf's here, and I'm hoping they're going to come up and Toby. Maybe if Toby wants to come up. Yeah, for sure. Milt said he wouldn't come up.
AJ, there were about 8 or 9 merchants on Rideau Street that I can remember from the early 40s, before Kittytown. Were they supportive of your father at that time? Yes.
Well, it wasn't my father. It was my grandfather.
Yes.
Someone else has to answer that.
Yes. AJ, my grandfather and your grandfather were very close friends, and they each supported one
Right.
another.
Joe, you want to come up? And Irving Aaron's here too. Come on, Joe. I just don't know those sorts of things. I think that I really wanted to tell that story. I thought it was a story that should have been told. So. You gotta speak in there.
I think you should also know what kind of a climate we were living in then. The Freiman store, trying to relate this to the $50 fine, used to have a biannual sale of 10,000 shirts for $1. A shirt like that today would cost you $100, one shirt. Also, we were going through the Big Depression. I did an apprenticeship as a part-time salesman at Freiman's as well, in the haberdashery section. And when a French Canadian would come into the store to buy something, they would look for a French clerk. It took me a while to find out what a chemise was, quel point. The shirt they wanted, it wasn't uncommon for them to break into English. But it was more than that. It was more than that. This went on not just in the Freiman store. It was in every Jewish store in the city. Many of the clerks, for example, in Kaplan's store, were French Canadian. J.B. Larocque was full of French staff, but happened to belong to a Jew. There are still 2 stores that I wonder about when I drive downtown. Letelier's was in approximately the same place, and Trudel Hardware, which was on Rideau Street and moved to Bezer Street, I think is someplace on George Street, on the other side of the market, and it's the 4th generation of Letelier's. So they outlasted us. But I can remember your dad in the store, your grandfather rather, and your dad. And your dad. And the quotas in the university, and the great things they did with St. Pat's College and Ottawa University, so that the quota at St. Pat's College became a little higher. When I tried to enroll in Ottawa University, this is a long, long time ago, and I knew the Dean of Arts. My father at that time had a class of Galachim who were learning Tanakh in Hebrew, and they called him professor, and he loved that, but he still couldn't get me into Ottawa University. And the answer was very simple, and when I indicated what qualifications I had, it sounded all right, and the last thing I said, well, I'm Jewish, you know, and he said, this is a Christian institution. That's fine. I could buy that. And we were going through a terrible depression. I remember over 9,000 people wrote exams for jobs on the quinquennial census that would pay $75 a month for 300 jobs, and they were guaranteed work for 4 months. This was it. Some of us stayed there for a year and a half, but that was it. Census clerk rate too. It wasn't a bad job.
Thanks. You got a question?
Joe, do you remember did Charles Ogilvy's hires you? No. There's only one I knew, Barney Ross.
Barney Ross made me.
He was just a here.
No, well, you're talking about an old Jewish family. You're talking about the Dover family. Yeah, well, Barney was Barney, but I'm not sure. Yes, he did work at Ogilvy's.
The only one I know, there wasn't another Jew there.
Well, eventually, Ogilvy's became the property of the people who worked there. That's what happened there.
There's always a saying they never hired Jews. Barney could have written.
Joe, did Burke's have employed Jews?
Burke's Jewelers? I don't.
Yes, they did.
Well, I know they did later, but I don't know about that.
AJ,
Yeah,
your sister Margot
right behind you.
school, that's good by her, come on, Margot. And her teacher made her go to Ogilvy's to buy fabric. Is that right, Margot? Wouldn't go into Freeman's. I not very praise for that.
Freeman, the big event of the year. The big event of the year at Freeman's was the Christmas window at the corner of Musgrove, where tremendous gift was given if you knew the number of beans in a jar or something, but you had to buy a ticket. I mean, you had to buy something in the store.
Alex Baldwin, you had a question?
Oh, there's,
Well, I have a sister working in that store, which would have been about 1950. But when I read my house, I personally saw Tissot behind the Ann Church. The Ann Church on the back of the street. But it was over behind it. It was behind the side. And there were hundreds and hundreds of different people.
Well, you know,
Are you Tissot and Ottawa now? Are you generation?
I think actually Irving Aaron knows that.
Well, just
Yeah.
Joe wants
Yeah.
to answer that.
Yeah, okay. Oh, Joe, you go ahead.
I just wanted to say that there were other things in the city that were just as bad. There were people living around the corner of our house on Daly Avenue who were distributing. You mentioned Guglu.
Yeah, Google.
The Guglu, Le Canard, these papers were coming into Ottawa. The worst kind of crap. And it wasn't uncommon. We lived on Daly Avenue near Waller Street. On the house next door to us, Elliot may remember, I don't think you're old enough. Hitler with chalk on the wall, which you couldn't erase. This was He reminded me of one other thing. Not just Hitler, but there were young Italian fellows my age that were being invited to go to Italy at Mussolini's expense, not unlike what is happening to our Jewish right of return. Same idea. young Italian boy.
Thanks, Joe. You got a tough way in there. Irving's organized.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me at the back? AJ called me a few days ago and asked if I would comment on tonight's topic based on my personal recollections. Before commenting, I should like to preface my remarks by saying there was a reverence for Archibald and Lillian Freiman that has never been equal to this day in the city of Ottawa. There was a reverence for Archibald and Lillian Freiman that has never been equal to this day in the Ottawa Jewish community. One has to remember the climate of anti-Semitism we grew up in the 30s and 40s. The overt anti-Semitism, whether it was schooling, employment, university quotas, or the signs posted just past Britannia Park about a mile west of here, stating, "No Jews or dogs allowed," gives you some indication of what we have to contend with. If you were Jewish, it didn't matter what your position or status was. And here's one example. My late Aunt Frida Steinman was a private secretary to Brooke Claxton, Minister of National Defense. She related the following to me. The Canadian government planned to honor Mr. Steinmetz, the American ambassador to Canada, and a Jew, and reserve the then very fashionable hotel resort on the Quebec side some 80 miles from Ottawa. I can't remember the name of the hotel. It may have been the Chateau Frontenac.
The Seniority Club.
Seniority Club, thanks. That was it. Okay, invitations were sent out, and the hotel, on learning that Steinmetz was Jewish, abruptly canceled the reservation. Despite the protestations by the government about the embarrassment it was causing them, not to mention the American government, they were told in no uncertain terms that no Jew, however important, however prominent, could set foot on their property. In a tribute to Mr. Freeman's passing, Prime Minister Mackenzie King had this to say: "The passing of Mr. Freiman is a great loss to the Jewish community in Canada, to the city of Ottawa, to the many organizations he supported, and to his adopted country of which he had become so distinguished a citizen. Mr. Freeman's death is for me a personal loss. His last years were burdened with many sorrows. None were felt by him more deeply than the persecutions of his race. The loss which his community has suffered in Mr. Freeman's passing will be deeply felt in many parts of the world." Now that statement is as accurate as can be. But here's something else. The same Mackenzie King wrote in his diary on one occasion about meeting a Mr. Cohn in Sandy Hill. Mr. Cohn told him he was a merchant and is retiring and handing his business over to his children. "My concern," King wrote, "is that the Jews are going to overrun Sandy Hill." Now this Mackenzie King, of course, as you know, held seances with his dead mother. He spoke to the lather in his shaving cup. He discussed federal politics with his dog, which prompted my son Stanley to say to me one day, "Dad, do you realize that a dog was running the country?" But you get an indication here of one side for public consumption, the other his personal thoughts. Now to the Tissot incident. I may be the only one in this room who's ever met John Tissot. I met him on a number of occasions as a young boy growing up. My father had a clothing store in the market, was also licensed as a pawnbroker. The police department required a written report filed on their forms for every item pawned. The detectives would come in every day to collect these reports in the event the items pawned were stolen. There were two detectives that I remembered. One was a Detective Keady, a giant of a man, extremely affable, who always had something nice to say to me if I was around. Then there was John Tissot, a mean-spirited, I know that Sandberger called him a rat, but I'm going to call him what he was, a mean-spirited, anti-Semitic bastard who outwardly exuded hatred of the Jews. I was brought out earlier in the evening. Tissot was affiliated with the anti-Semitic paper called La Patriote, which was distributed throughout the French community in Lower Town. There's a grocery store nearby owned by Mr. Turgeon, and his store was one of many distribution outlets for La Patriote. I can still picture Turgeon wearing a not-too-clean hat along with a not-too-clean apron, but who always came across as a polite individual. His counters were always stacked with La Patriote, and I'd pop into his store and take a copy. La Patriote was a rag of a paper replete with caricatures, which are brought out tonight, of money-hungry Jews with big noses, and I guess you can get the picture. I can say that Julius Streicher, editor of Der Stürmer in Nazi Germany, would have been proud of La Patriote. Streicher, you may recall, was hanged following the Nuremberg trials after World War II, and it's a pity Tissot couldn't have been hanged alongside him. Several years ago, I was reading the paper. My eye caught the name Tissot on the obituary column. So I phoned Racine Robert and asked him, is this a Tissot who was once a detective on the police force? And they told me he was. I hung the phone up and I said, I hope that SOB fries in hell. I also added a few Yiddish phrases to give his demise some tom. I vaguely remember the details of the trial, though A.J. brought it out correctly, and we were all pleased that the court ruled Mr. Freiman's favor. Mr. Freiman was represented by Warwick Beamick, considered a very able litigator at the time. I knew Warwick's sons. I guess we can speak about anti-Semitism at great length. I'm sure everyone in this room can add something to the subject. It's still with us, and short of Armageddon, we can never eradicate it, but we can be vigilant and we can meet the challenges head on. A.J. Freiman did it in the 30s, and we can follow his lead. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Irving.
There's a hand up at the back. Mr. Rosenfeld, sorry.
Medallion.
Medallion.
We'll get to the end of that story.
Great.
My name's Gedalia Rosenfeld. I'm from Montreal. I have to tell you that I met Mr. Arcan. I met his right hand, Dr. DeCarry, who was a dentist. And as a young Jew in Montreal, we used to have our squabbles with the so-called Patriot Goglu and the whole group of them. I want to bring this story further with you. One of my hobbies is Jewish history. And in reading some of the Jewish history books in Canada, Mr. Tissot, after leaving Ottawa, ended up as the chief of police in Rouen, Noranda.
Okay.
Now, let's follow that through for a minute, if I may, because 10 years later, I'm on the airplane, and I'm sitting beside a gentleman who's just coming back from Europe. His name is Thompson, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson then became the head of the Social Credit Party. One of his right-hand people was Rael Cowett of the Social Credit Party. And where did he come from? Rouen, Noranda. I met Mr. Cowett one time, and I spoke with him. And he says, "You ever go to Ottawa?" He spoke to me, and I answered him in French, but I'll speak in English. He says, "Yes." He says, "One of my teachers was Mr. Tissot." Okay, and that's a long time ago, so let's not get into it. But I thought I'd just bring this point up with it. I have had the privilege of meeting your father and your grandmother at time, and it's been my pleasure.
Hi's back there somewhere. I saw him come in. Hi, Soloway. Where are you? No, I don't know that, but I assumed it was Tissot. I don't know. Is Hi, where are you?
Speaking here.
What?
Did you say speaking?
Yeah, speaking that left.
Okay. Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, I will do so. Can you not hear me? Bruce, can you hear me?
Not yet.
I can hear you. I was sitting listening to AJ, and of course reminiscing some personal experiences that I had at the time. Pardon my throat. I had come from Russia, where I was there until the age of 9. The experiences that I had living in Russia hardened me considerably, so that when I came here to start with and found out the Tissot story, I wasn't quite as taken as some of the local people who weren't in the area where I was, because they hadn't been exposed to the pogroms, to the beatings, to having to to live under haystacks night in and night out to avoid the persecution we went through. Tissot, however, affected me. Of course, I knew the Freiman family personally. Mrs. Freiman, the late A.J. Lawrence, Audrey, I believe, is here.
No, she's not here.
Not here. I've known all the Freiman people, and I have the greatest regard for them. Evidence, A.J.'s acquitting himself this evening. I could probably ramble on for 15 or 20 minutes without repeating myself, but I don't think this is the nature of this evening or the purpose of this meeting. I think A.J. has accurately summarized what we went through, but you've got to remember that at that time we were not as free to voice our objections publicly as we are today. For this, A.J. deserves more credit than anything. He took it upon himself to take an active part to raise the issues that were so important with a happy result that ended up at last. I knew Tissot not well. I'd met him. I made it a point to meet him because I was then going into law. And I was hoping that someday I'd meet him in my professional capacity. Thank goodness it didn't happen. He was, giving him credit, full marks. He was dedicated, he was miserable, but he was consistent. And to that extent, he met up with a group of people, the Jews of Ottawa, led by A.J., who were just as dedicated, just as miserable, and just as consistent. We did not give up until the deal was finished, until he got his comeuppance, and he left the city, although there was a mark in the eastern part of the city. I knew Vensa personally. I knew him very well. He wasn't a miserable man. He wasn't out to do the Jews harm, I don't think. But he was dedicated in his work. He was retained, and whether his heart was in it or not, I can't tell you. It had to be to a certain degree. But you could talk to him. We tried to do so, but on instructions from his client, he wouldn't enter into the fray. I guess I'm probably the only one here who can speak from personal experience of the occurrences in the city and the effect that it had on the Jewish community. You know, I come from a special Jewish community. I'm a Billings Bridge graduate. Billings Bridge graduate, for those who don't know what it's all about, and I see some of us here. Billings Bridge was an area in the south part of the city. It's now part of the city, where the people from Europe settled there because the Greenbergs, and I don't think that was their name to start with, because the Greenbergs made a mark in the area, and every time they brought anybody out from Europe or from their settlements, whatever it was, everybody came to Billings Bridge. So this was the indoctrination area. This was the indoctrination dedication, and this was the school that taught us the changes between Russia and Canada, for which I, of course, am extremely grateful. I just want to say in closing, I am not going to review any of the incidents that I experienced. A.J. has done a remarkable job going through them. Other people have spoken. Repetition doesn't add anything, except it brings back a lot of memories that you wish you had forgotten. So with all that, thank you very much.
You. No, it was nothing. It was 50. Well, to my knowledge, from what I know, there was nothing other than Tissot getting a $50 charge. That's, I don't know. We can check. Does anybody else want to? Guess that's it.
Sylvia, would you come forward? Just hold it. What, Shirley? You'll have to come up, please. Just hold it, Sylvia, please. Well, come, use the microphone.
I think that there was one huge benefit to the community. Before this, there was a campaign over on the other side of the river in Ottawa that was called Ashek-Shenu, which meant to French people, buy at home, buy from your own people. And I think the Tissot Fair put an end to that.
Thank you.
That's it. Sylvia, you come forward, please.